Hello, welcome. I'm Amy Anderson, and today I am joined by Michael Sacopulos of the Medical Risk Institute. Mike is a healthcare attorney who has been educating and advising physicians on how to identify and reduce liability risk for more than 20 years. Mike is a trusted friend and advisor for me and my go-to for all things related to healthcare compliance. So thanks for being here with us today, Mike.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's just jump right in. And I thought it would be helpful to start with vocabulary. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about healthcare compliance? What does that mean?
Well, it's a great question. I think you're getting at the fact that it's used in different scopes.
Mhm.
In its broadest scope, compliance just means that we're trying to comply with all of these laws that are out there, and there are, as you know, Amy, just a ton of laws. Laws that apply to medicine and healthcare are roughly 9 times the length of the entire U.S. tax code. So if you think taxes are complex, multiply that by 9 for healthcare. So we have all these laws, statutes, regulations
Mhm.
out there, and if we want to try to be within them and act appropriately, then we have to. That would, in my mind, fall under the biggest scope would be compliance.
Mhm.
Now, it's oftentimes used in terms of just coding and billing, where people
Mhm.
speak of a compliance plan or being compliant, and are thinking only on a smaller scale of matching up with the rules and regulations laws for coding and billing. Um, but we probably need some different vocabulary because it can be confusing. Are we talking about compliance across the board, or are we talking
Mhm.
about it specifically as to coding and billing?
Gotcha. Yes, I think even myself, I get confused from time to time. So maybe when we use the word compliance, we should be specific if we're talking about billing and coding versus patient privacy or one of the other many facets of compliance. So when I hear about a compliance program, um, maybe tell us what does that mean to have a compliance program, and does a plastic surgeon need to have one?
Let's start with narrow and go to broad. So I'll start by trying to answer your question, talking about coding and billing compliance
Mhm.
and having a plan for that. And to the extent that the practice is doing any third party billing, even if it's 5% of their overall revenue, then they have to have a compliance plan. Not just a good idea, it's required by the law. And you can imagine so much of what is paid for by the government in healthcare.
Mhm.
And the government's position is we want accurate and fair, honest billing coming our way if we're paying the majority of this. And to
Mhm.
do that, one of their plans is that you have to have a document in place and do certain activities.
Mhm.
And that's what most people, when they refer to as a compliance plan, are talking about it in the terms of third party billing. And
Mhm.
there are different components. In fact, the law specifies different elements that you have to have in your plan,
Mhm.
and those are all towards getting aimed towards accuracy. So you have to have some training of staff. There
Mhm.
has to be some auditing. If there are violations, there's supposed to be some degree of discipline, and that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that we have to grab the person who made the error and throw them out on his or her ear. It just means that there has to be some degree of accountability.
Mhm.
So there are all these different, and I think that there are about eight different categories required under the law to have a compliance program if
Mhm.
you are doing third party billing. Now, some of your audience may not be doing any third party billing, and probably a good number of your audience hope that they will not be doing any third
Mhm.
party billing down the road, and it's all private pay.
Mhm.
And then I think we need to talk about some other laws that they have to be compliant with. There's things out there, the No Surprises Act, which is
Mhm.
relatively new, and it talks about good faith estimates. Most aesthetic practices already do a very nice job of that. But there's specific laws on these. Even if you're not dealing with third-party payers, you still have to comply with that. And then there's the whole area of patient privacy. People refer to as HIPAA, and certainly HIPAA is a big part of it at the federal level. And there's the HITECH Act, and we could spew off all different types of acts, but it all kind of falls under the category of patient privacy. And there, I think your audience needs to be very careful, because violations are easy to have happen, and can be really painful for both the individuals and for the practice. So you spend a little time on that.
Okay. So when we think about the compliance program in terms of third-party billing, we've worked together. I've seen some of the plans that you've helped some plastic surgeons create and put into place. Who oversees that? And I guess, I'm just going to ask the question that I know some of our surgeons are thinking: who enforces it? What's the risk of not doing that? So because if third-party billing is such a small part of the practice, how much of a risk are we playing if we don't put that into place?
Well, it's interesting. So who oversees it? There is the Office of Inspector General does a lot, and also the individual companies. So Amy, you and I are in Indiana, and it's the home of Anthem, right? So we could expect that Anthem would have some kind of say if the bills that were sent in were not accurate. And in the background is the False Claims Act. Both there's a federal False Claims Act, and then each individual state has their own, and saying that if you have billed in an improper way, and I say improper, not fraudulent, because sometimes people make mistakes and it still comes under there was not the intent to defraud the government, but effectively they improperly billed. So these acts come into play, and then we have attorney general's offices, and we have Office of Inspector General. So there is a large infrastructure in the government, both at state and federal, that do enforce these, to the tune of collecting anywhere from $3 to $5 billion back from healthcare providers on an annual basis, right? So this is not something that is a very random chance. It's not equivalent to playing Powerball. You do have a chance of being audited and getting cracked, because they know that you have money and they have algorithms to pick you up. So even if it's a small amount, if you're outside the statistical norm, somebody somewhere in a basement wearing Chuck Taylors has figured out an algorithm to catch on to this. So I think that there is a probability of having issues if you're outside the norm and doing things that you're not supposed to. In fact, probably much more so than over on the privacy end, simply because there's an infrastructure set up to deal with these type of issues.
Okay, good. It's a real risk. There's a real chance of an audit, and we don't want to be caught on the wrong side of that if that comes.
Oh, it's ugly. Ugly. Nobody has time for that. We don't need that.
No. And so I guess in follow-up to that, Mike, is it still a risk if the surgeon's not participating in a government payer, if they're out of Medicare and Medicaid, and maybe not even contract with any insurance, but doing some out-of-network billing, is that they still are open to an audit in that scenario?
They are. I think that it can still happen. It is a little less likely, but it is still problematic, and something that we want to be careful with. Once you get pulled into these things, they seem to take on a life of their own, and now we're asking for more records, and it just goes on and on. So you're far better off avoiding the problems than dealing with them when they come up. Not dissimilar to lots of areas of medicine, right?
Absolutely. Okay, well, so let's shift a little bit, I think, away from the third-party compliance area, and let's talk about patient privacy, because that certainly is something that touches all practices, no matter what. And so what are some of the common areas of risk that you are seeing in practices related to those potential patient privacy violations?
That's a great question. And I think that in my mind, they fall into two large categories. One is cyber, because we see risk with ransomware, things like that, because so many practices are using electronic medical record systems or electronic health systems. And then the other category, and I'm no Linnaeus here, but it's just kind of everything else in my mind. And that is problems with the person at the front desk who goes out and tells their friends that you've had some local celebrity or someone from the local television channel come in and is very proud of the practice and isn't doing it in a malicious way, but is still talking about patients and should know better, right? Or someone checking on their next door neighbor's cousin who was a patient just to be able to say this was done or what. Again, not in a malicious way. Those are kinds of things that happen. Records don't get shredded properly. These are still kind of run-of-the-mill issues that we have with patient privacy. So the majority now that I see have an electronic component to them, either a traditional cyber being hacked ransomware, or some kind of a social media post or a post in response to a review of the practice, and someone in the office thinks it was hurtful and wildly unfair and jumps on and responds. These are the kind of breaches that that I see, you know, kind of on a daily basis, unfortunately.
And so often I think we don't even necessarily think about it as a privacy violation, especially on the reviews, but
Sure.
that's definitely an area that I do coach docs. We have to be very mindful, very, very careful and selective about how we're responding to reviews in that capacity.
And it's a legitimate threat, as you know. There have been plastic surgeons that have been sanctioned. People have lost their license for this type of behavior. So it's not an idle threat.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that, under that realm of patient privacy, I think most practices are well aware they need to have a privacy practice policy, and that patients are asked to acknowledge, we have to give it to patients, post it, and patients acknowledge that they received it. I know truly it's a privacy policy. A lot of practices call it their HIPAA policy. I know it's related there. And this is a tactical question though. How many, does the patient need to sign that every year, or is it just a one and done type of situation?
Well, I may actually have some good news here. And for a compliance lawyer, it's very exciting when we have any good news whatsoever, Amy. So this is, I feel like I'm almost ready to take the victory lap here, because there are proposed rules out of the Office of Civil Rights. These are the HIPAA police, the folks at the federal level that deal with it, that would do away with the need to have a signature on these privacy policies. Now, you'd still have to have them. And they'd still need to be posted and all of that, but you wouldn't have to collect each and every person's signature on this this document. So that's the good news. It's not been official yet. We're still waiting for the final word, but they proposed it, and I can't see anyone objecting to this. I know of no enforcement in this area where people didn't collect signatures. So that's all good news. Now, putting on my lawyer hat, I have to tell you, the law is still that you have to have a signature on here. I say that you get it one time, and that's it, unless you're changing the policy. If you change the policy, then it's been updated. The people need the new policy, whether they read it or not. And let's be honest, 99% of the patients never read this thing. They just ask where to sign. I know it. You know it, but nonetheless, we got to collect these things for the moment. But I think that that's going to change.
Okay, that's very exciting news.
Yeah, it's about as good as it gets at my end. So take pity. I will give you a pro tip though on this, and I've seen people that have had problems. They have one iteration in the practice that they hand to people that they sign, and they have a different iteration simultaneously on their website. I don't know if they've cut and paste from somewhere else. And so either one of which would have been fine, but you can't have both at the same time. And I've seen people get in some trouble for that. So you want to just check to make sure you're using the same iteration, both in the office as well as on the web.
Okay, great suggestion there. Appreciate that. Okay, so we'll be crossing our fingers that those signatures can go away. I'm always looking at how do we make the process more efficient, and that would be a huge step in that direction. So in terms of our employees, we know we need to do annual HIPAA. I think most surgeons know we need to do annual HIPAA training. I maybe just answered my question. Is that sufficient? Is it a once a year thing? Is there anything more you recommend around HIPAA training?
Well, I think that we can look at it in two ways.
Mhm.
What satisfies the law? And you're absolutely right. I mean, if we do in annual training and we document that, we're tick the box, we're good to go for another 12 months. But then you can say, isn't the purpose of the training to avoid some problems? And if that's what we're looking at, then I would argue that we need to do more frequently, less lengthy types of training. And here I'm thinking there's lots of studies out there that show, especially in the cyber arena, some kind of cyber awareness of what not to click on, if it is done in very small doses with higher frequency, is far more effective. So
Mhm.
if we are trying to stop breaches, I would say we need to remind people much more frequently. If we're just trying to meet the hard requirement of the law, you're good to go with once a year.
Okay. Okay. Well, one of the things I appreciate and enjoy so much about working with you, Mike, and your team is you do make this pretty easy. I think for any practices working with you, you create your annual training, staff can log in, watch it individually online, or we could put it on the screen during a lunch meeting. Everybody gets done at the same time. And you send us our reminders even when it's due. Your team lets us know, hey, it's time for your annual HIPAA review, so that we don't forget in the busyness of the day-to-day practice.
Well, you're very kind. Most of my practice revolves around working with smaller medical entities, right? Which is different than most healthcare practices that are
Mhm.
focused on health systems, larger hospitals, and it's a completely different set of challenges when you have a one or two or three provider practice.
Mhm.
They simply can't afford to have floors of buildings full of lawyers like an HCA can, right?
Right.
So we have to pick and choose how we deal with all of these laws and regulations. The vast majority apply to the solo practitioner as they do to an HCA. So
Mhm.
um, much of my job is trying to be selective and look for where are the problems most likely to come from, and let's do that. Otherwise, we could spend 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year just trying to be compliant and never see a patient.
Right.
Can't do that, right?
Right.
We got to be reasonable. So I appreciate your kind words.
Yes. And what I love about you, Mike, you're always very practical and understanding that yes, we want to ultimately get back to patient care. So thank you for that. Is you mentioned the Office of the Civil Rights, I think, is the HIPAA police. Are they policing this, whether or not we're doing HIPAA training with our employees? Is anybody overseeing that? And are there penalties for not?
So Office of Civil Rights can oversee and does issue some penalties. I have not seen them in isolation. Usually what happens is there's a problem, they investigate, and then they start to create a list of all the things that the practice has done wrong. And
Mhm.
on that list is they haven't trained people in a timely way.
Mhm.
And so that piles on. So yes, there are penalties for it. Are they knocking on the door and asking for your logs of when you train people? I've not seen that.
Mhm.
Now, HIPAA and these privacy laws are also enforceable and are being enforced by the attorney generals of each of the 50 states.
Okay.
So they're really a multi-level police force on this. And some states are more aggressive than others, as you might
Mhm.
imagine. But in my experience, the problems come when there's a breach or some kind of an issue, and then the investigation begins, and it's a laundry list of things that have gone wrong, one of which is that nobody's been trained. And I'd like to think that the training helps prevent the breach in the first place. So I'm a
Absolutely.
big
That's the goal, right?
absolutely.
Okay. So you mentioned cybersecurity and that one of those big areas of risk is on all things related to just the world we're in these days, the very electronic driven world. So this is a common thing, Mike, as I'm helping surgeons set up their practice. We start talking about hiring an IT provider, and surgeons these days, very tech savvy, very comfortable with computers and even small networks, and feel like, hey, I can go to the Apple store or the Microsoft store and get my computers, get a couple tablets, we get Wi-Fi set up, I'm connected, I set up my printers. Why do I need an IT person? And I know enough to be dangerous in this area, that there's things like firewalls and antivirus. But from your standpoint as a healthcare attorney, why does a surgeon need to, or do they need an IT vendor? I think you'll say yes. Why is that? And what are some of those cyber things that they're maybe not thinking about when they're setting up their office?
Well, you're absolutely right. The majority of folks can run out and go over to Best Buy and whip out the credit card and buy the infrastructure that they need, at least the hardware for their office.
Mm-hmm.
I think what is missed in this may be, I get when people are opening a new practice, dollars are scarce, and we have to be careful. So I'm not opposed to folks buying their own hardware and getting things set up, but I do think that you need a knowledgeable IT person to look over and create and give you ideas. And here's why. There
Mm-hmm.
are a number of national standards that if you comply with, then you fall in a safe harbor. So if there is in fact a breach, you're not going to be penalized because you had met these standards beforehand. If you just do it yourself and you don't know the standards and have a problem, then you've got even a larger problem.
Mm-hmm.
And look, anybody can be hacked. We've seen that from the White House to the Department of Defense. It doesn't matter how good you are, how much effort you have, you're still vulnerable. And
Right.
so I think it is worthwhile to at least go to the effort of having an IT person help you with these standards to make sure that you are compliant in the event. Hopefully it wards off any kind of trouble, but if it doesn't and you still have problems, then you're protected under the law from all these penalties that could be visited upon you. So that, in my mind, is the big benefit. And a lot of that can be done without having to hire people to do every last thing, to run every last wire, buy every monitor, hook up the printer. You can do a lot of it yourself, and then just try to cobble onto the expertise of an IT provider. And that's, I think, what I would recommend for folks getting started. You don't want to miss out under the benefits of these laws for the sake of not having somebody help you for a few hours.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's good to know that maybe there's some middle ground, that we can have some cost savings by doing some of it on our own, but recognizing there definitely is an area we need true expertise, an IT provider with healthcare experience and knowledge. I think that's important. And then is there an ongoing component to that when you're working with a practice? Are you looking that the IT providers doing something at least periodically or annually?
Well, we sure hope so. I think that the good IT providers are doing things. And look, it's a very dynamic field, right? The threats that are coming in vary all the time. How patients' practices get breached varies, and so the IT folks are to be on first alert for this and be able to help prevent problems. You also are to be doing annual risk assessments with looking at your IT infrastructure, and they help keep you up to date on that as well. So again, I don't know that you need somebody full-time on your staff, but you do need somebody knowledgeable because it's not just to set it up and then let it go forevermore type of situation, unfortunately.
Agreed. Okay. So when it comes to cyber insurance, that seems to be, it's not brand new, but it's a newer policy in the world of business insurances, and not something that all my surgeons think about right away. So first I'll ask, is it necessary for a plastic surgeon to purchase cyber insurance?
I do not sell insurance, but I am the biggest advocate going for it because I've seen practices be completely wiped out. I mean, gone, close the door and lock it because they didn't have cyber insurance. All of your patient data is, for most of new practices, is in an electronic form.
Mhm.
And what I can anticipate someone out there right now, Amy, thinking this thought, because I hear it all the time. Well, I'm small, I'm off the radar, I won't have a problem. Let me just tell you, you are the most likely to have a problem,
Mhm.
because if I am a cyber thief, whose records do I want? Do I want to hit the pediatric practice? I don't know. Those kids don't have any money. It's your people. You've got the most desirable patients to hack into. And
Yeah.
think about what is, in the smaller the practice, typically the less infrastructure. So
Mhm.
you've got not only super high value patients from the thief's point of view, but you also are an easier target. It's the perfect recipe for them. So I would say it's the opposite of what most people think. You're the
Mhm.
ones with the targets on your back.
Mhm.
Super high value patients, low security.
Yeah.
So we need to change that. We don't want to change the component about the super high value patients, right? We want the
Right.
practice flooded with them, but we do want to have the right infrastructure and protect that information. Um, in a breach is very expensive. When this happens, all the laws that have to be complied with. Studies show that on average, it's somewhere between $340 and $368 per patient. So add up how many patients you have, and the number, multiply that by 350. That could be your potential exposure. That is a catastrophic number for most
Yeah.
practices.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think you need cyber insurance. The other thing that cyber insurance offers is it comes with groups of people under contract that, should you have a problem, will
Mhm.
be ready to go to help you, and are at negotiated rates that are below what you can hire them for on your own. Because these
Mm.
cyber insurance companies obviously are using the same providers and have cut deals with them to
Right.
lower their rates. So you get really knowledgeable people for less than you can do. So if you have a problem, that's always very helpful too.
Mhm.
So I say work with a good cyber broker. I think this is one of the largest threats to a practice that I know of. All threats put in, from
Mhm.
traditional med mal to wildly dissatisfied patients,
Mhm.
employees behaving badly, you name it, throw them all into the stew. This, I think, is the one that is would keep me up at night.
Okay. Okay. Those are strong words there, Mike. We're taking notice and paying attention. So you and I have you've graciously reviewed some cyber insurance policies with me on behalf of the surgeon, as we've shopped for it, and it's all Greek to me, and not sure what components of a cyber insurance policy are important. So when you're looking at a policy document with a surgeon, what are some of those key things you're wanting to make sure that policy includes?
Um, it's a great question. And a few years back, I was brought in to help create a new healthcare cyber insurance policy. And so the way I started this task was to find as many different cyber policies as I could and read through them and see what other people were doing and how things varied and whatnot.
Sounds like
50,
a fun weekend activity.
at least 4 or 5 IQ points were forever gone after that exercise. Um, 53 different variables is what I found. It's completely different area than what you would expect in traditional professional liability coverage or auto coverage, home coverage. If I go and buy a insurance policy for my vehicle from Geico or State Farm, it's
Mhm.
basically going to cover the same thing. I can get different limits, but what's covered is covered.
Mhm.
Not true at all of cyber. It's all over the board, and some policies are kind of like Swiss cheese. I will give you an example of one thing that I look for, because I've had this a few times, sadly, where someone comes to me and says, um, we got these emails and we were tricked and we thought we were paying appropriate invoices and we paid $400,000, only to find out that we had been through phishing emails and all set
Mhm.
up. Somebody got into our system, read our emails, and twisted around and got us to pay this. Um, and the term for that is social engineering.
Mhm.
And many cyber policies excludes social engineering. So they're
Mm,
saying, well, you sent the money voluntarily, and the people are like, well, no, we were tricked into it.
mm,
It's just a different type of thievery. They're
yeah.
saying, no, sorry, it's not covered.
Okay.
So with cyber, there are two areas to look at. There are first party and third party, is the terms that the insurance company use. And first party is yourself. What does it pay you if you have a cyber breach? And
Mhm.
obviously, third party is coverage for patients, right? If you have a breach, these are not you, but your patient population. And what benefits does it provide to them? Do they get identity theft protection, or even getting letters out there, so forth? And so we need to look and see, is it cover both first and third party?
Mhm.
And are there major exclusions for areas where we would expect to see problems? And
Mhm.
so that's kind of what I do. I will tell you that it changes with some frequency. And
Mhm.
so this is my plea to the folks listening to our conversation, Amy, is that they find a broker that really knows cyber, because it changes enough. And I'm not advocating for one company as
Mhm.
opposed to another. I'm just saying you need somebody really knowledgeable, because this is not a cookie cutter product. You
Right.
can't just go to your local broker and say, hey, how much is a policy going to cost? You're going to have to put a little bit of thought into it, and you need somebody to help you through it.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's definitely great advice. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Mike,
Uh-oh.
because of course, super common question that I'm asked, and I'm sure you are as well, is, how much coverage do I need for cyber? And so how do you help a surgeon determine those appropriate coverage limits?
Well, I think it depends on how long you've been in practice, how many patients you have in your system.
Mhm.
Isn't that such a lawyer answer, Amy? It depends. I know people don't like that. It's wildly infuriating. But I would say you're also somewhat limited on how much coverage you could buy. At one point, we could buy as much as we want. Then cyber losses were high, and companies
Mhm.
started cutting back. So not less than $1 million would be my recommendation. And I see people, smaller practices, typically on the upper limit of 3 to 5. So those put you in the ballpark. I think if you're just getting going, I would want $1 million coverage.
Okay, that's good advice. And that is something I've learned, that the I have requested higher than that, and they are not willing, the insurance companies are not willing to write a policy that high for a brand new practice. So I think that kind of ends with then as much as you can get in coverage, right? That's
Yeah.
as much as they'll give you.
It's that
Yeah.
old "how much is enough more"
Yes. Yeah.
line. So, but I'm also, look, all jokes aside, I understand that dollars are scarce when we're getting up and going and we're new practice. So you've got to spend them wisely, and get a policy in place. And if you can't afford a lot, at least get something.
Yes, I think that's great advice. And I can't help, Mike, but brag on you and your services that you provide, because I have found it so easy to just reach out when we're looking at that annual renewal, that you'll put eyes on it, you'll give some quick advice on, and help guide a surgeon, because we know these are big, expensive decisions they're making. And
Absolutely.
so just sharing with our audience that when you work with Mike and his team at Medical Risk, they're going to get your plans in place, remind you of your trainings, and Mike's just a phone call away, very accessible to talk through some of these big decisions before you pull the trigger and make maybe a bad decision.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, in closing, Mike, I know we could talk all day about the exciting world of compliance and entertain everybody with that, but we'll be mindful of your time in there. So just, thinking of plastic surgeons starting a practice, what's the number one thing you want them to know and pay attention to at this phase of their career?
Um, it's really unkind to limit me to one, so I'm going to give you a couple. But I think the first off is that you need to work with someone other than me. You probably need to talk to an accountant, because I've seen a lot of people have problems picking the wrong corporate entity, and
Mm,
then the die is cast, right? So this is before you see the first patient. You're locked into something that for tax reasons is a bad idea 3 or 5 years from now.
mhm,
So that takes very little effort up front and makes a huge difference. That's one thing that I would do. And then I think I look to, where do people have problems when they first come out of the gate and really get their practice up and going. And there I think it's two areas. One is with an employment of the wrong person.
mhm,
And I know, Amy, you and your firm help select the right employees to match up. That
mhm.
is invaluable to an opening practice. And so if anybody can hear my voice, you need someone that you have no margin for error when you begin. And so Amy and her folks are masters of that, and you need to take advantage of that. And then second, I think we're trying to bring in lots of new patients, and so I would concentrate. That is going to be a risk as far as compliance with medical marketing and social media risks.
Mm.
And those are all open to the public, where people can see and are hitting vast majority of people. And so there's nothing undercover there. You're completely exposed. So you want to make sure you do that appropriately, so you don't hit a big snag right out of the gate trying to bring new patients into your practice. That's, I think, my 3 points when I was only asked for one.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Mike. This was so valuable. We'll be sure to link all your contact information with this video so that docs know how to reach out to you. But thank you again. We appreciate you being here.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Amy. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I wish your audience well.